Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to another lecture. Very important lecture. Remember that? Alright. Well, so which course we are pursuing, students? Yes, you know. Today, now things are very clear to you because today we are going to start another lecture. Which one? Lecture number 8. Very good. Very good. You all see? So you are fresh now. It's morning. You need to be fresh, students. See, I'm fresh. Yes. So I want active students. Mind you, for the TOEFL, the teacher should be active and the student should be active. Fine. Only then you can learn a foreign language. So, of course, if you want to teach English, yeah, the pilot should be active. The teacher should be active. And again, the learner should be active. If you both are active, yeah, learning would be ideal, students. So you need to be active. Fine. Whenever the question is asked, reply. Fine. So a lot of drills are there. And this method, mind you, teacher gets tired. Why? Because he gives a lot of drills. He monitors lots of drills. He monitors your chain drills. He monitors your repetitions. He asks you question. Like, see? So, like, of course, initially I started with the question that which lecture is it today? And you answered me it's lecture number 8. Good. So, last week, what did we talk about? Do you remember? Yes, ALM. Oh, good. Very good, students. ALM, audio-lingual method. Audio, audio-lingual. Related with your speech and then the method. Fine. So, shall we start? Fine. Ready for it? Where's your book? There. Where's your notebook? Alright. You want a glass of water? Okay. Go and bring a glass of water. Keep a glass of water with you so that during the lecture you need not to go out. I want what? Concentration. I want your reply. You need to interact. Can you do it? Yeah, you are doing it. You have been doing it and you will do. And you will keep on doing. Fine? Because this is the demand of this course. Right? So, you cannot be a good TOEFL teacher unless you do the subject well. So, yeah, again, if you want to have a cup of tea, you can have a cup of tea, no problem. You can keep a cup of tea in front of you. Yeah, you can take a sip and then, alright, answer to my questions. Fine. Clear? Any objections? Any problems? In the last lecture? No? Have you read that? Have you read the proceedings? Have you seen the class? Right? Okay. Good, students. So, here we are. Where are we? We are here. What are we talking about, students? Yes, we are. Which method? Audio-lingual method. So, students, in that method, what do we do? Yes, a method that talks about what? We also call it oral method. Remember that? Alright, so as usual, what do we do? Again, the practice. Review of the last lecture, and then I'll tell you what will we do in this method. Today, we'll talk about the goals and techniques of ALM. The last week, my dear students, we met last time and we talked about intro to ALM and we talked about principles. So let's start today's lecture. Very effective lecture, right? It's also called Army method. Remember that? So that's why, see, in academies, right, this audio-lingual method works, my dear students. Look at here. See, what did we talk about in the last week? So, yeah, we started a method. We also call it Army method. And again, in World War II, I told you last week, you remember that America needed what? Proficient, native-like proficiency. Fine, for the people, for the military personnel. And for this purpose, even America funded universities to have a method so that the learner would be able to learn language like native speakers. And because because these people in fact had to do a lot of jobs, lot of assignments. Fine. So that's why, I mean, America funded this the project, and those, that's why this is the of course you can see the background of this audio-lingual the method is there. Fine. So let's start now that the things we discussed last week. So what is it? Language forms. Yeah, language form occurs naturally within a context. Clear? So when you offer a cup of tea to somebody, then the person reply, he thanks you, for example. Fine. And then, for example, you want to place an order for tea, for lunch, whatever. So you give details of that order, right? You want to request somebody for a cup of tea, and the person asks you, yes, okay, would you want a tea with sugar or without sugar, right? If sugar, how many spoons of sugar, for example? And you tell him one spoon or 2 spoons or whatever. Fine. The doctor prescribes you medicine. Then what do? You reply, of course, well, I mean that how many doses do I need to take, right? And then, I mean, he prescribes you 1 spoon, then he tells you maybe after the breakfast, after the lunch, or after dinner. Fine. So what is it? Language. These language forms. You know what form? F-O-R-M. Right? These language forms, they occur naturally. So that's why. And how can we have it? If you drill that. An audio-lingual method, of course, in fact gives practice to the students, and once they practice a lot, it becomes their habit, students. Clear? Fine. And we remember that we discussed that there was no room for mother tongue. No mother tongue is there, no native language is there, right? Only the target language. And again, you might say, well, I mean, this audio-lingual method, yes, there are ways, I mean, where this method resembles direct method. Yes, you're right. Some principle, of course, mean also, you see, that the direct method and the audio-lingual method, yes, at times they are similar, of course. So this is what we talked about. And then native speaker like model, that you see, to help student, to provide student, of course, a native speaker like model. Again, here mean this model can be taken from an English speaking country also. You can take that, and then of course once you take a model from an English speaking country, then that passage would tell you a lot, right? About the culture of language of that the country, of course, about the expression and all that, about the weather of that country, like you see. Or you can, I mean, if you write, if you feel that you are good at, you can write a good model, good dialogue, you can do it. Fine. So again, that is a native speaker like model is there. And then language learning is a process of habit formation. What happens? Habit. And how it forms. How you see, how you can do that, how you can achieve it, that once you learn a language, right, through repetitions, through drills, through practices, fine, by being in different situations, by speaking that language, that expression continuously. So what happens? It becomes your habit, in fact. So that is, of course, the important area of this audio-lingual method, that once that this language learning process is a habit formation, right? It's a habit. Then again, of course, we try to prevent learners from making errors. Whenever if we find there's an error, the teacher immediately corrects them, and again through different drills, of course, that correction is done. We also talk about reinforcement. Like if you remember, I talk about that language is acquired through imitation. What is imitation? You imitate somebody, in fact. You copy somebody. Like it is said that, of course, when you want to be a good speaker, right, good orator, listen to orators, in fact, right? Listen to people who are good speakers. If you want to be a good banker, talk with a banker, right? Interact with a banker. So that when you interact with the banker, you talk with the banker, so you would come to know the tips. Fine. Similarly, if you want to be good essay writer, then you interact with an essay writer, for example. So you would come to know the tips, right? Because if a good essay writer is what? right? He is an open book for you. Fine. Similarly, if you want to be, a good scholar, so see, the religious scholar, yeah, you can interact, you can meet, fine. You can discuss things with the person, or definitely things pass on. So is the case here that, of course, reinforcement is there. And if somebody, if a student does a good job, so he produces a good sentence, a correct sentence pattern, right? As per your expectation, you need to reinforce. You need to say good, well done, right? So this is what we have talked about. And then students should learn to respond to both verbal and non-verbal stimuli. Again, language learning is not only the words that we have, the body language is there. Fine? So we need to know which gesture, right, the speaker has used and what does it mean. And we saw in the class that the teacher just directs, how about he? Is that clear? How about she, for example? When you talk about, say Misbahul Haq, for example. So when people raise question, how about Hafiz? Is that clear? What do you say about, for example, another Imran Khan, for example? What do you say about other cricketers? Is that clear? So when you talk about commentators, for example, then we talk about Ravi Shastri. And then, right, people say, how about Ramesh Raja? I hope you understand. So that's why, in this way, what? Different, what? Through body language, yeah, the teacher uses different gestures, even the postures, right? And even through his voice, paralanguage. If the student makes a mistake, in fact, there is an error. So what the teacher, yeah, uses his vocal quality, in fact, right? His voice, and then through his voice, when he, the rhythm of the voice, fine. So then the teacher, corrects that student, in fact. I hope you understand. Clear? So this is what we saw in this audio-lingual method. And then again, the patterns, of course. Practice. What? These pattern practice help the students to form habits, which enable the students to use that pattern. When there is a pattern, so what happens? So that pattern, of course, my dear students, yeah, help the student. Fine, do what? You see? Yeah, they practice that pattern of that, the language, and with continuous practice, you see, they start using that sentence without thinking for that. So this is what, again, the practice against the this and all that. So this is what we call it, that we saw in the last, of course, the lecture, that you see, it was just a brief review of the previous lecture where we started audio-lingual method. We went to a class and we saw the class, and we saw that how pronunciation, of course, if the student makes mispronounces a word, and how teacher helps him, and then how teacher makes student practice, how teacher gives them different drills and all that, right? So let's come to today's lecture. Today our roadmap is to see goals. And what else? See, goals here mean that we have talked about what? We have to see goals and techniques of which method? Audio-lingual method. Which method? ALM. Good. So students, what are the goals, by the way? Goals of what? Right? Maybe you play football, there is a goal. There is a goal post also. Right? So every method, like we talked about the methods. So what are the goals of ALM? Audio-lingual method. So see, the goal is teacher want their students to be able to use the target language communicatively. Yeah, this is important. Communicate and communicatively. This is what the teacher want. They want the students, yeah, to be able, in fact, they expect their students to use that target language communicatively. Of course, the purpose is communication, right? And of course, maybe you might have heard this communicative approach that these days we follow that. So in this, the goal of ALM was to help students, right, to be able to what? use language for communicative purposes, so that in different situation, whenever the student go, so they learn this language in such a way, they learn English in such a way that they could be yes, be able to communicate that. This is one of the goals. And then overlearning is there. Fine, students would overlearn, and this overlearning, yeah, stop this habit of thinking like generally people do, that they think in their L1, and then they translate from L1 to national language and national to some international language. So once you learn something, when there are the over-learning, in fact, yes, may stop that, right, may help you, fine, to speak that language, of course, for the communicative, the purpose. Then you would not think, you would not translate, fine, directly you will move, because you have practiced a lot, you have what? I mean, rehearsed a lot, fine, through drills, through games, different activities, fine. Again, if I call this method a drill method, so yes, you should agree. Why? Because again, because the background I gave you, that it was of course in the 1939-40 Second World War, when we needed, in fact, America needed people having native-like proficiency. So even still in academies, if you visit students, of course, the audio-lingual method is being used. Like, of course, when the students, of course, through drills they learn, right, and they may not know they use a pattern, but they may not analyze that pattern, in fact. So this becomes their habit that they use that. So that is what that over learning is there. And second and third could be that, yes, forming new habits through overcoming the old habit. I mean, if there is a mistake, so that is an old, the student mispronounces the word, or if a sentence, in fact, a student speaks, for example, a sentence that needs improvement, so you give them drills, give them practices and continuous practices. Like we saw that one dialogue was used for many a times, right? And at the end, of course, what happened, that the people knew each and every word of that dialogue. Why? Because there was a dialogue, and that, see, not only with single pattern, the context. So the nouns, the teacher substituted nouns, teacher substituted subjects, but the pattern remained the same, right? So now this pattern, of course, they have learned in such a way that now they could use it without thinking, fine, in their future. So of course, these were the goals that teacher want the students to be able to use language communicatively. Which language? That language we are learning. And of course, the teacher, being TAFE teacher, we want our learners to be able to communicate which target language communicatively. And this was the goal of ALM. What is ALM? Audio-Lingual method. Good. So again, over-learning is there. People learn a lot. Over-learning, and then forming new habits through overcoming the old habits, students. This is fine. All right. Now, again, come back to the role of a teacher. And also, when we see the role of a teacher, we also see goals of a teacher. Is that clear? Right? So, what is the role of a teacher in audio-lingual method? Orchestra leader. What is orchestra, by the way? The word, the word chorus, choral, orchestra leader, in fact. So teacher, in fact, he leads, and the students are there, fine. So he leads them, right? He what? Directs them, and the student follow, fine. Students do drills, in fact. They repeat things. So he, in fact, a leader of an orchestra, right? So in audio-lingual method, the teacher is what? Like an orchestra leader. And then what teacher does? Another role of teacher is, please provide students with good model for imitation. Yeah, the model that we saw, the dialogue that we had, fine. So I'm going to post office. So a model is provided. Teacher, yeah, provide students with a good model. Again, a native-like model, in fact. And then that model is practiced, used in the class, and student, of course, when they practice that model, and then what happens? Once they practice, they in fact, use that sentence pattern in different contexts. Again, students are imitators. Student imitate, right? Maybe initially the two students come in front of the class and they act out a dialogue. What others do? Others just imitate them, right? So then, of course, initially the two students come, then another, of course, two more students come and they act out the same dialogue. So again, what happens? More imitation. Student imitate. Is that clear? Like I said, what is it? Right? Language is acquired through imitation, through repetition, through reinforcement. Clear, students? Got it? Fine. So this is another, the role of a teacher. That, right? Teacher is orchestra leader. Students are imitators. They imitate. They copy students. Fine. All right. Now here, what are the characteristics of teaching learning process? Students, yes, you understand? What are the characteristics? All right. See, new vocabulary and structural patterns are presented through dialogue. Again, we discussed that sentence patterns are given priority, right? And then vocabulary items are also given, but afterwards. Clear? So, sentence pattern. Fine. That in this, if you're talking about the characteristics of teaching learning process, the first thing is that sentence pattern is highlighted. And the words are given afterwards. Again, dialogues. Yes, students. Fine. Of course, the learning through imitation and repetition. Students imitate. If somebody has developed good pronunciation, others imitate that. And if somebody is unable to pronounce the words, then of course, out of the class, maybe some students know that correct pronunciation, and even the teacher also, he can help the students. So maybe in fact in the class, out of 20 students, maybe 10 do not know the correct pronunciation. Fine. So then the teacher, in fact, teacher helps them, and students definitely, what they do? They imitate. So again, what happens? Dialogue is very important. What is dialogue? But dia means two, log, conversation, in fact. So dialogue, of course, if you see your day-to-day life, there are more dialogues. Well, students, so dialogues are an important part of this class that we saw. So because once you have a dialogue, you ask questions and you get the reply. So it is a conversation between two or more than two persons, in fact. So we have a dialogue. And then there is a positive reinforcement. When student does something good, so teacher says, good, well done. So there is positive reinforcement. And then grammar is induced from the examples, right? A lot of examples are there again, that through examples, students, in fact, come to know subject to verb agreement. For example, we saw that of course the subject is, for example, we saw the he, and then there was is, he is, for example. How are you and how is he? And how is she? How are they? Clear? So through examples, the grammar is induced, my dear students. Fine? All right. Yes, student-teacher interaction or student-student interaction. What is it? In this method. Yeah? Do we have interaction? Yeah, there is. Interaction is teacher-directed interaction. I hope you understand. Fine? So teacher, in fact, directs. So we have interaction in this method, but it is teacher-directed. Teacher directs, in fact. Clear? Why? Because teacher makes everything possible in the class, right? That's why we say that teacher gets tired in this method. Why? Because teacher has to be on his toes, right? Teacher is on the driving seat, right? Teacher is a driving force. So he makes all the activities possible. Is that clear? That's why he gets tired in this method. So this interaction is teacher directed. And also we see the interactions, student-student interaction, chain drills, right? And also dialogues. Is that clear? So dear students, yes, if you talk about interaction in audio-lingual method, so we have interaction, fine, but again the interaction is teacher directed interaction. And again we saw interaction between students and in the shape of what? Drills. Which drills? Chain drills. Clear? Now what is chain drill, by the way? Okay, I stop here. I want you to think of it. I'll tell you later on. Fine? Think for a while and I'll come to you what is a chain drill. Fine? Alright students, so here how we view the language, of course, the view of language, the view of culture. Right? So what does here mean? The view of language be influenced by descriptive linguist. Now again, what is this by descriptive linguist in fact? One is the prescriptive approach where things are prescribed. But here mean the language is viewed descriptively. Now what is descriptive view of linguist in fact? Right? Yes, you have an idea? That language in fact, I already in fact in one lecture I told you that my dear students, that while talking of grammar, once we discussed that we speak language. Language does not speak us. Remember that? Yes, you remember. So the point is that descriptive linguist is how linguists describe language in fact. And how linguists describe language? Yeah, because linguists, what linguists do, my dear students, they take a sample, for example, right? For example, linguists want to analyze language of what? Upper class, for example. So for this context, what do we need? We need what? We need a sample of a speech. So then that sample is analyzed by linguist in fact. Or we can take a discourse from lower class, for example, how beggars communicate. And if you want to analyze beggars' language, so then you need a sample for that. Or you want to analyze bankers' language, for example. So what you need for it? You need a sample of bankers' language, and then you can analyze that discourse, that which kind of jargons, what the banker use in their language, or which kind of jargons economists use in their language, or which kind of jargons business students use in their language. So through analysis we come to know. So that is what descriptive linguist is. Is that clear? So that's why of course we view the language descriptively. The language, right? The way people use. Is that clear? So again, we view the language of course at different level, which phonological level mean phone. Morphological level mean, phone mean the sound level in fact, and then also morphological level mean, what is morphology, by the way? Study of the form of language, right? So morphological level, yes, it has its own distinct patterns. Is that clear? So each level has its own pattern. Either you study the language at phonological level, or at what morphological level, at semantic level, or pragmatic level. So every system of language has distinct pattern. If you see at pragmatic level, so we see the use of the language is important. If you see at syntactic level, then the grammar, the arrangement is important. If you see at semantic level, so the words, connotation or denotation in fact are important. Clear? So that is what mean the way we view the language. And then everyday speech is emphasized. The locus of course mean, we see that the dialogue, we saw the drills, so our conversation is from everyday situations. And then what else? Level of complexity of the speech is graded. Is that clear? Level of what? Yes, initially just single dialogue. And then you can expand, for example. When the student, come to know, they find it easy to use a single pattern. Then, for example, transformation, right? First simple, for example, I work, a simple sentence. Then you can transform, for example, I do not work. Again, the transformation, do I work? So, affirmative, negative, interrogative, and of course, work hard, imperative. Is that clear? So, the level of complexity of the speech is graded at different level. So, of course, This way we view language in audio-lingual method. Alright, what areas of language are emphasized? What language skills are emphasized? This is an important point. In AL, of course, we'll see that what are the language skills. So, my dear students, here, like I told you earlier, that vocabulary is kept to a minimum while students are mastering the sound system and grammatical patterns. Clear? So, pronunciation. How do they pronounce? And again, fluency. Clear? Also sentence patterns. Right? One sentence pattern, the going to pattern, if you see, has been used in many drills. Right? And then, of course, vocabulary items, yes, teacher replaced, substituted, but that pattern remained the same, which shows that, well, the focus on structure more than the other elements, mean vocabulary items. Yes, students, clear? Fine? Alright, should we move on? Are you tired? No? Fresh? Okay, have a glass of water. It is there in front of you. Huh? No? Take a cup of tea. Okay, students, you can have a cup of tea whenever you want. It's really important because tea energizes you, right? Some say, even there are some people who say tea is not healthy. Say water is healthy, in fact. Somebody said that those who avoid 3 T's, they enjoy life. Which 3 T's? Tea, tobacco, temper, right? This is, somebody said that, you may agree with it or disagree, that people who avoid using 3 T's, they enjoy their life. With 3 T's? Tea, first T for tea, cup of tea. Second, tobacco, cigarettes, or temper. Temper, some people have temper problem. Alright, students, so coming back, talking about what? Areas and the skills of language. So first we talked about vocabulary is kept to a minimum, and then natural order of skills presentation is adhered. For example, listening, speaking, reading and writing. This is the natural order, my dear students. Even a child acquires, you observe a child, the child listens. Fine? And then child that tries to speak. And then he starts reading and finally he writes something. This is what we call it a natural order of skill presentation. Is that clear? So, listening first, then speaking. Fine? And then we call it reading and writing. We can call it LSRW. LSRW mean listening, then speaking, then reading and writing. Clear, students? Alright. So, see, another of course area is the oral skills receive most of the attention. Again, oral means audio, right? Cassettes, for example. And then oral, listening and speaking, right? Receive most of the attention. So in this way, these are the skills of this language, in fact, which are the areas of language are emphasized, and again, skills. Clear? Any confusion? Alright, shall I repeat for you? Okay, fine, no problem. First I talk about that vocabulary is kept to a minimum, right? Again, I mean, if you go back, I said I'm going to post office and then we change that post office to bank, a playground. But that going to pattern remains same. So it means that shows that, well, focus more on stuff. But again, how structures are taught, this is important, right? There was no rule, right? Fine, only through use. The students, in fact, they learn and the teacher helps them, of course, this method. And then natural order of language skills are there: listening, right, reading, speaking, listening, speaking, reading and writing. It's a natural order, the way a child acquires. Have you ever observed? Do you observe children around you? Maybe your nephews, maybe your nieces, maybe your brothers, in fact. Okay? So you can observe them. How do your siblings or nephews or nieces, I mean, they acquire that language. You see? And someday you might be surprised that, well, a child uses an expression and really you come to know how come that child uses that expression. The point is, yes, because he might have listened to you, for example. You use a word and that child has picked that word, of course. That's why we need to be very careful in front of the children, that we need to use a language, because sometimes we don't care. But mind you, the children, of course, they pick those expressions and they use it. And sometimes they don't know the exact meaning of that. That might be a slang. Fine? And later you scold that child, but it's not the child's fault. The fault is yours because you have used that expression, of course, or that vocabulary item. Maybe you didn't care that either child is listening or not. You thought you were just speaking, nobody's around, but that child has picked that expression. It happens, and the parents must have observed this thing, that once they communicate and at times they use a slang, or people watch TV, for example, right? These days a lot of dramas are there, Turkish dramas are there, and of course, and our generation, unfortunately, children particularly, when mothers watch those dramas in presence of children, what happens? So children in fact pick those expressions, and sometimes they use those expressions, and later parents lament on that why the child has acquired that expression, and sometimes they scold that child. But the point is, this is unfair, right? You pave ground for that child, you give him that ground, you create environment for that, and later you say you snub that child, so you should snub yourself. Clear, students? Alright, come back. Fine. So, audio-lingual method is what? Oral skills. Fine, good. Now here, the role of native language. What is your point of view, by the way? Alright, like we saw that, of course, mean that students, the habits of the students' native language are thought to interfere with. I mean, we say that we have been discussing that, of course, that, why we are not fluent speakers, because always L1 interferes. That's why the drills are given, so that students would overcome that problem. The problem is that, well, this thinking in that language, and of course, and translating it. So once you give practices, rehearsals, repetitions, and drills, student would master this target language. To have that mastery, yes, practice is required, in fact. And even if you say that the more you practice, the better you would be, in fact. And if you don't practice, you cannot be. You see some people, of course, maybe you have seen some teachers, some people around you, that they speak very good English. So how come? I mean, maybe they might have been your friend, your colleague, but the point is they practice a lot. And those who practice, definitely practice makes a person better. I won't say the perfect, but definitely practice. So you need to practice all these 4 skills. And once you practice, then that becomes your habit. So that becomes habit, and then you need not to think. And then naturally that thinking comes out. I mean, these days, of course, most of the time you might have seen that people think in that and they move on. So because there is no practice of that language. And why there is no practice? Because, it is not the language of the community, right? I told you in one of the previous lectures that, well, if you expose yourself to an environment where everybody speaks that language, and you will see that. Fine? And then you learn that automatically. Is that clear? Fine? Alright. So dear students, again, the target language, of course, is mostly used in the classroom instead of the native language. Yes, very simple, clear, you have seen it, you have observed it, that, well, of course, whatever drills were there, whatever activities were there, teacher, yes, whatever, takes place in the class, teacher directs. But there is no concept of L1, in native language through target language. So, what is the role of native language, students? No. In simple words, no native language. Okay, so once we saw that there is no L1 in the class, and we saw that students, in fact, of course, exercise different drills and they try to make their habit. So how we can evaluate? What is the evaluation procedure? So dear students, of course, this evaluation is what? Discrete point. What does it mean, discrete point? Here I mean that each question on the test would focus only on one point of the language at a time. This is important. right? That substitution, for example, single substitution, 1 point, right? Maybe a question that would focus on what? On, slot substitution, single substitution slot in the parts of speech. Or another would be patterning, right? Sentence pattern or vocabulary item. So this is what we call a discrete point, that each question, every question would test, all right, only 1 point of the language at a time, right? Student might be asked to distinguish between words in minimal pairs, for example. I hope you understand. Example, I gave example of ship and sheep, kit and cat. Is that clear? Live and live. I hope you understand. So minimal pairs are there. So dear students, evaluation is what? Discrete point evaluation. Refer to your text, you would find more examples. Alright, so how do we deal with errors in ALM, right? So errors are to be avoided if at all possible through the teacher's awareness of where the student will have difficulty and restriction of what they are taught to say. Is that clear? So again here the teacher role is important. So whenever the teacher finds that there is a problem, there is a confusion in a sentence, right? So the teacher, through his paralanguage, through his voice quality, through his pitch, so he makes student realize, in fact, that there is something fishy, in fact, right? So then, because immediate correction is needed, only then student would make it their habit. Otherwise, they would make this habit of what? Yeah, they would learn that of course wrong grammatical pattern. But again, see, once that pattern is given, again the correct pattern, of course. And once they are given the correct pattern, they would exercise it, they would use it, and it would become their habit. And then chances are very rare that the student would repeat the mistake. Fine. So yes, there are some errors, and they are dealt, but very professionally these errors are dealt. Clear, students? Alright, so very important. Now it's your time. What are the techniques? These were, in fact, there are some goals over there. What are the techniques, by the way? What are the techniques? Right? In this, and I told you techniques and principles. For every technique, there is a principle behind. Okay. One technique was dialogue memorization, and you saw that of course teacher gave them a model and we practiced that model. Fine, initially the student practiced, then in front of the class, 2 students practiced, and then the teacher and student practiced, and again student and teacher practiced, right? So a lot of practice was done. And ultimately what happened? The student learned that dialogue, in fact. So spontaneously, fluently they started speaking that dialogue. Fine. So memorization. Fine. Dialogue memorization, of course. And again here this once they have memorized this dialogue, so they could exploit it in different situations as well. So this first technique is. And what is the principle behind? Yes, again, once they know dialogue, they memorize it, so they would be more fluent. Then we have seen a drill. What do we call this drill? Backward build-up drill. What happens in this drill? I told you earlier that we move backward. If the teacher feels that students are unable to grasp the complete sentence, or they find some problem in the sentence, in the long sentence, so what he does, he starts at the end, he starts a sentence, he picks the last part of the sentence and he goes back. Is that clear? Like, he says post office, for example, and then he comes back. We call it backward build-up drill. Clear? A sentence, for example, is that I'm going to market. Now, if he feels that students are unable to utter this sentence in one go, or they struggle somewhere, they face some problem somewhere, so he just picks the last word. Example, I'm going to market, so a market, or simple market, for example. Then he says, first he says a market, then he says going, right? Then he says to a market, third he says going to market, then am going to market, and finally I am going to market. See? So backward. Can you give me an example? Think of an example. I'm going to write a letter. Fine, good. First letter. Fine. To a letter. All right. Fine. Okay, going. Fine. All right. I'm going to write. So start from the last part of a sentence. And this is, the name shows backward build-up drill. Fine, students. Clear? Right. Again, very simple word, repetition. Here again I would say, I told you initially that this language is acquired through repetition. Through what? Imitation. Through reinforcement. So this is what we have seen. That you repeat things, in fact. There is continuous repetition. Yes, students? Alright. Then, again, we saw some chain drills. Now what are chain drills, by the way? You saw that the teacher asked one student, how are you? I am fine. And how about you? Right? Then what happens? The teacher, in fact, uses these greetings. In fact, he asks one student, maybe Ali, and then what Ali does, Ali uses the same, of course, greetings to Zia, right? And the Zia replies him, in fact. Fine. And the Zia, in fact, of course, moves on. And next to him is Waris. So he asks Waris, how are you? Right? Says, I'm fine, thank you very much. And what about you? I'm fine too. And then the Waris communicates to Moiz. And then, of course, Waris asks him. And then it goes on. It goes on. And finally, the last student is, in fact, Asad. So Asad asks the teacher, how are you, sir? I'm fine, thank you very much. Clear? What is it? Chain drill. So, my dear teachers, TEFL teachers, when if you feel that audio-lingual method is a success for the class that you are teaching, so you can use this chain drill, and of course you can, you can create it, you can add value to it. In fact, is that clear? So your sentences can be long, or you can manipulate it, you can maneuver it different way. Is that clear? So chain drill is a real success. Why it is success? Because once this chain drill is given, so you find maximum attention of the students. Clear? And then maximum involvement is there, of course. The teacher gets himself involved, right? So he passes on, and then he sees, he of course, the teacher directs, and then that chain goes on. And everybody, in fact, interacts, right? So again, there is interaction from teacher to students, and then of course between students. So people who are sitting side by side, they can exchange their views, they can ask greetings, and sometimes you have in a class, you may not have all the students having the meeting of mind. Some students may have a problem. So this chain drill, in fact, helps students overcoming their personal conflicts also. What do you think? Yes, so here it's a very good point that once you exploit chain drill in the class, so people who are not in good terms, right, so they interact with one another. So once they interact, they start interacting, the classroom environment improves. Clear, students? So chain drill is very important. And there is, of course, what technique? Single slot substitution drill. Of course, we move from, like we said, that from simple to complex. So first substitution is there, first replacement is there. What? Single slot substitution. Like example, I'm going to what? See, a bank, for example. And then, right, the teacher shows what? A cup of tea, for example. The teacher shows a cup of tea to the students, right? Say, I'm going to take tea. Fine. Clear? So the teacher shows what? A mobile to the student. I'm going to buy this mobile. Fine. So then teacher does what? I'm going to change the slide. Clear? Teacher may show a picture. Fine. And the student, see, now initially teacher gives them that sentence pattern, then he gives them a picture. And the student says, I'm going to, picture is bank, a bank. I'm going to a mosque, for example. Is that clear? So that is single slot substitution. And then we move on what? Multiple slot substitution. So what is it? Yeah, here means definitely different parts of speech. Here the slot requires a verb, or slot requires an object, or slot requires a subject, for example. So again the clue is given, in fact. That clue is given, and that clue in fact helps the students which part of speech to be inserted. So I mean, in the text you will find some examples are there. So his multiple slot substitution skill, I mean drill is there, where student again they would know that they would know which part of speech is to be inserted here. And then there is transformation drill, transform, right? Sentence, example is transform, right? That you change one sentence from, say for example, affirmative to negative sentence, right? See, or from negative to interrogative, or from interrogative to sometimes even double interrogative, WH questions, for example. Is that clear? So I work in a university, for example. So I mean, I do not work in a university. Do I work in a university? Why do I work in a university? Clear? So transformations. Fine. And then why transformations? Student would learn, right? Again, this technique, and the principle behind is the patterns, of course. Different patterns they would come to know, and through this transformation, through these techniques, of course they come to know this principle. Another is what? After this transformation drill, question and answer drills, in fact, very important one, right? Where questions are asked, right? The teacher asks question and the student reply, in fact. So of course, and then even the student asks question to other students. So once the question answer session is there, yeah, definitely, of course, if there is any confusion between the student and the teacher, that can be overcome, of course. And this, when you ask a question, you learn how to ask a question, and teacher gives them the model, for example, right? And that model can be followed, other students follow that model. And they ask question repeatedly, then what happens? That, you know, in future, whenever they have to use that question, they can easily do that. And then of course, minimal pairs, like of course some students, I mean, they are not familiar with short vowels or the long vowels. So again, the teacher gives them, of course, example, a model, and then students follow it, right? Kit, cat, right? So ship, sheep, for example. So different minimal pairs are given. And then dialogue is at the end, complete the dialogue. Maybe some parts of a dialogue are left, and student can easily complete that dialogue. Of course, why? Because they have rehearsed a lot, they have drilled a lot, in fact, and they can easily complete that. And then, of course, supermarket game. What is it? Right? Students go to market and they what? They want, see, that supermarket alphabet game, for example, right? I want to buy apple, right? I want to buy a few apples. Ali wants to buy what? Bananas. And Zia wants to buy what? Carrot. See? So supermarket alphabet games, right? It can be what? Dresses, it can be different items. Fine. So that games also definitely help this. Of course, this is a technique, and once to this technique, again the principle behind is that, well, the language, of course, the sentence pattern and all that. So dear students, this is what? Is what? Audio-lingual methods, techniques, right? So now it's your turn. Tell me, what is this method talks about? What? Yes, language is acquired through. Yes, students, try imitation. Can I ask what is imitation? Copying. All right, good. Then what else? Repetition. Fine, good. Students, repeat. Fine. What else, students? Then reinforcement. All right, good. You have learned it. Fine. So language is acquired through how? Again, I ask you, give me in one go. Yeah, this is what we do in ALM. Fine. So language is acquired through what? Through repetition, through imitation and reinforcement. Good. You've got the concept. Fine. And what happens there? Think for a while. What happens in this? Which techniques we used? And what are the principles? Alright. Fine. Try again. Have a look if you want to. Transformation. Drills are there. Lots of drills on this method. Fine. You see, drills are there. The chain drill is there, right? Then repetition is there. The question answers are there. Use of minimal pairs are there, right? So all these are there, of course, in this. And then we have a single slot substitution drill, multiple slot substitution drill, right? And all that jazz. Very important method, right? So the method, of course, started in the wake of Second World War. Why? To have a native-like proficiency. I hope you understand. You see, and of course, definitely America funded, right, this method, and this method really works well for the cadets, in fact, people who want to have native-like proficiency. And then we talk about the techniques and then the principles here. Now, who would summarize this lecture for me? Try. You can do that, no problem. You have potential students and you are future teachers, you are future TEFL instructors. Come on, don't be hesitant. Again, it's a tip that a teacher should not hesitate. Mind you, that nobody is perfect, people have problems, we all have problems in fact, but we have to overcome these problems, right? So we have to take initiative, we have to come forward, and we can do that, right? Unless you come forward, nobody would push you. You have to encourage yourself, self-motivation, self-encouragement, right? You have to say that you are a good teacher and you are going to be a good teacher. And for this, right, jungle mein mor nacha kisne dekha, right? You have to volunteer, you have to come forward, fine? So come forward and see what else can be done, in fact. Fine. I hope you have removed your hesitation. Yeah, you have to, right? This hesitation is nothing, my dear students, right? Just it's self-created, in fact, image in our mind that we feel something would happen. Nothing will happen, I tell you. Nobody will shot you dead. Clear? Just come out and see. Maybe sometime you have a potential. I know many students, initially they were very, very hesitant. But once they just came up, and believe me, they conquered everything, in fact. I know in my college life there was a student, and of course, he was very, very shy and hardly took part in any competition in school life. Once in a college, of course, he was given a chance and he came forward and he made a speech, and believe me, then he won many trophies, in fact. He became the best debater of that year. But before that, he was very, very shy. So, that you're all the teachers, you're all brimming with potentials, you all have potential. So, you can, right? And of course, if you want to excel in, you have to come up, you have to remove all these problems. So, dear students, with this, today, in fact, if I just give you a recap of this, the method, today in this lecture, we started with goals and what? Techniques of ALM, right? So, in goals, remember that communicative, like, of course, that students should be able to communicate language, to communicate in that language, right? In our case, for example, English. So if you want to use audio-lingual method, so this can be the goal, right? The goal is to be able to communicate language, right? To use that language in different situations, and that's what we saw. And then how it can be achieved? Through different drills. Habits have to be formed. And habits cannot be formed unless you give repetitions. Continuous repetitions are important. Yes, students. So repetitions are required. Lots of repetitions, drills are, and you can use these drills in the class. And you can think of some more drills. Fine. You can think of some more drills and see what else can be done. For example, right? Of course, you can ask. You can play, right, a movie in the class. And that can, of course, and ask students to see that, right? And then there can be two persons, of course, in that, and one student can think of a question, what is it saying, and other could reply. Again, I would say that a good teacher, and of course that a full teacher, should be creative, right? So you need to be creative, think creatively, in fact. And once you be creative, you can think of so many activities that you can exploit in the class, in fact. And mind you, teacher should also be actor in the class, right? So your class should be active, and this class definitely is inactive because teacher works really hard, and definitely this method, makes teacher, in fact, teachers get tired in this method because he puts lots of efforts. Is that clear? Because he gives drills and repetitions, of course substitution and all that. Fine. So dear students, towards the end of this lecture, we can say that audio-lingual, the method, of course, is one of the good methods, particularly for people in the military. It doesn't mean that you cannot use it in your context. Yeah, it can be used, of course, if you feel that your environment helps you, right? If you feel that this method can work well in your environment, right, in your situation, organization, you can use this method. I hope you will try, right? You can see, of course, again I would say that you can Google out, fine. You can find out more information. There is much material on TEFL from different websites. If YouTube is available, you can see that, of course, YouTube. There are lectures also, and then you will be able to exploit this method well. So keep in mind, we are doing this method, and our intention is to see that if this method can be applied in the class or not. I hope you will do this, right, and you will try to use this method in your teaching the classes and see how does it work. If it works well, yeah, it's a success of the method, in fact. If it doesn't work well, then you need to give why there is a failure in our system. Is that clear? Any questions? No? All right. So thank you very much. See you in the next class, and the next class we'll talk about silent method. Okay. Thank you very much. See you in the next class. Goodbye.